It's like, but we'll see. Unless I can talk him into teaching, having somebody else teach that introduction to digital design and assembly language. That'd be nice. I'd like to stick with a little higher level programming. So, not that you have to program 1 billion, those, but I know how they do that. Really, mine's just more the foundational theory side. So we got some of the circuit design boards in there, but like I said, we got them 3 days before the semester, and just like I didn't have time to even do anything with them. But I'm planning to spend a lot of time down here this summer to learn some of those areas where I have weaknesses. Okay, chapter 14, other C topics, just kind of miscellaneous. Objectives. In this chapter, you redirect keyboard input to come from a file. Doesn't mean a whole lot with Windows, but if you're in Linux and you create your file and you want it to run in the middle of the night where there isn't somebody inputting data, you're going to redirect that input from a file into the C program in a shell script. Redirect screen output to be placed in the file. Because again, you're running a program, like I said, on Linux in a shell script, and you're going to have the data from that go to a file so you can look at it later. Or so it can be used in another program. You'll write functions that use variable length argument lists. Never have done this, but this is if you're writing like a system utility. I broke my Linux, so I can't really show Linux tonight, but I think change mod is change mod like 755, and then you put your file names, and you can have an infinite number of file names. I think I never tried to put an infinite number, but the idea is you can put multiple file names. As a consequence, that change mod is bringing in a variable length argument. So I'm guessing. I never have looked at the code behind change mod. Now all that is such you can look at it if you're real curious. Let's see if we can find it. Since we got less material tonight, we have time to play a little bit. Change mod source code. Let's see if I can even locate it. See down here, we're just talking about the argument, and it has this. So it's an array. We got multiple items. And you'll notice here, I mentioned earlier that in the course that I didn't use the case very much. I used it one time because I had so many options. This would be the example of that. When you have so many options where it'd just be really cumbersome to do a bunch of if-else, then case comes in handy. And even here's some more up here. So if you're really into writing the system utilities, that's your goal, in your IT field. Go out here and start looking how they do these system utilities. You could take this bit of code here. You don't have to do it completely from scratch. Changes. Say, okay, I want change mod to be different. I want it to do this or do that. And then you go in and change it. I never worked on a project to write an operating system, so I don't have much exposure in that area. That actually is a really clean program. I think I could even understand that. I looked at some of the source code behind the Linux operating system, and it's not as clean as that. It uses a lot of pointers, and I was getting pretty lost in that convoluted code. Let's see. Process command line arguments, compile multiple source file programs, assign specific types to numeric constants, process external asynchronous events in a program, and dynamically allocate arrays and resize memory that was dynamically allocated previously. Introduction. Many of the capabilities discussed here are specific to a particular operating system, especially Linux, Unix, and Windows. I might argue that about Windows. Probably more Linux and Unix. But then again, I don't know. It's somewhere here. Maybe not. Settings. There's something called PowerShell. And it's more than just like a advanced DOS. You can do a lot of different things with PowerShell. And so maybe this is where you could write a C program to run. You could schedule it to run through PowerShell. Never have done anything with it. I wonder if it does dir. Yeah. Well, it looks a little bit different. So probably you can do some of the C programming with that. Redirecting I/O. In command line applications, normally input is received from the keyboard, standard input, and the output is displayed on the screen, standard output. On most computer systems, Linux, Unix, Mac OS X 10, and Windows systems in particular, it's possible to redirect inputs to come from a file rather than the keyboard, and redirect outputs to be placed in a file rather than on a screen. Both forms of redirection can be accomplished without using the file processing capabilities of the standard library. If I hadn't messed up my Linux, I can maybe demonstrate that, but I'll show it here. Echo. What is it in DOS? I don't think it's Echo. I think that's Linux. I'm doing Control O. Save. Okay, now I won't be able to. I'm not good enough with command or the bash files anymore to do it. But to bring in input, you bring in like another file. And so you'd have run it, and then you like bring in that file like that. So that bring in as input. That's what they're talking about, redirecting it in. And where I have this come out as that, they're talking about redirecting it like that, where it doesn't go to the screen at all, it goes to the output.txt. Which gives you that. So that's what they're talking about with the redirection. But again, to have the redirection, you really need to have some kind of shell scripting capability. And the batch you see here is not really powerful enough for that. Other colleges are starting to offer PowerShell as a separate course. Looks like it's used by system administrators. It probably makes sense. Collecting information about computers. So different commands you can do. Listing BIOS information. Returns fairly compact and complete information about the system BIOS and local computer. That looks promising. Like it's not going to screw up my computer. Edit, paste. Missing an argument for parameter computer name. I wonder what my computer name is. David Hayes laptop. David Hayes laptop. Verify service destination is running. Consult logs. I'm doing something wrong. Mainly because I've never used PowerShell before. But that'd be the idea, is that you could put this into a script and automate it to run. Perhaps when the person logs in, maybe in the middle of the night, have it run, and you can gather all this information. So that's always been an important piece of IT, is that you can track who's doing what. How many people will break the law when it comes to computers? Huge amount, right? Yeah. I don't have one program that's illegal. I think that's a true statement. Well, maybe I do. This is illegal.
Okay.
I don't think I have it anymore, but I used to have an emulator to run Nintendo, regular Nintendo, I forget what it's even called now, NES games. And I downloaded the ROMs for the games I actually had. I didn't do the other ones. And so I guess that is technically. I mean, I had the games, I bought the games, but my NES has those little features where you push it in, you know the NES?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You push it down, it doesn't make the correct seat there, and then you got static all over the screen, a little white snow, and you can't play the game. So, but beyond that, I think 100% of what I have is fully illegal, and the reason why is if you go into programming, you realize somebody's put a lot of effort into writing that program, and that's like stealing. So when you're copying their program, going out to dark web or torrent sites or something like that, and and grabbing something illegally, it's kind of like you're hurting one of your own if you're a programmer. So, but most people will do it, and so as a consequence, IT's got to keep track of people. That's why they have things they run there, so they can track what kind of hardware, what kind of software, everything. You might say, well, why do you care about what kind of hardware? So most people are going to get that off the dark web, and you'd be surprised what people do. Bring computers from home, hook them in. Now, a good network strategy is that I cannot bring a computer from home and plug it in to the network. That it's specific, that network connection that's over there can only be this computer. That opens up a security hole if you can come in with your laptop and there's even if all the windows are or all the computers are locked and everything, if you can take your laptop and plug it into the network connection, you now have access to the network. So you can do sniffers on it. So you can monitor what's going across the lines. You can do password crackers. There's all kinds of things you can do. And to be honest, I don't remember if I've tried it in here. I'm guessing I can. I'll have to try that someday. I'll plug in my computer from home, my laptop, and see if I can use the network here. You shouldn't be able to. But then that becomes kind of a management nightmare. How do you determine that it's a valid computer? Especially when we have computers right and left that...
That is where we use MAC address filtering through the NIC.
No, they don't have that at all here.
Okay.
Because I got that little server running on Linux, and it's talking through the network. Little Antsle is what it's called, ANTSLE, and I haven't got to setting up other servers yet. I want to set up some other ones that just have them so we could access them and so forth. But so it appears you can plug anything in. So. But yeah, MAC addresses oftentimes you can lock it down. And it's also what do you have that you could lose, if somebody does hack in. What could you hack in and get here? Probably not as much as the main campus. Let's see. There's several ways to redirect input and output from the command line. As a command prompt window in Windows, kind of just what I showed. A shell in Linux or a terminal window in the Mac. Consider the executable file sum on Linux, Unix systems that inputs integers one at a time and keeps a running total of the values to the end of file indicator is set and then prints results. Normally you'd have your user just type them in. And with input redirection you can have all those numbers come in from a file. For example, if you have if I can think of an example. I'm drawing a blank. The only one that might be valid nowadays. It used to be valid, like when I worked at Coke, and that was 30 years ago. But when I worked at Coke, they would send in their general ledger entries or sales data, and it would be like a general ledger entry per line. So they might send in 100 general ledger entries. And then you'd have a process take that and redirect it in and then write it to a database. That was back in the old days with modems and everything, where they'd dial in and they'd send a file. And then the file would be sitting in a folder, and that script would go through and process all the files in that folder. I'm guessing most sales offices now do not need to use a modem to dial in to send these flat files. I'm guessing most of them could probably access the database directly. So update the SQL database right on the fly. The one example I can think of is if you got a web page and where people are going in there and maybe they're requesting information. That's a bad example because you can email that. No, they're requesting information. You can set up a web page such that it emails the salespeople directly, letting them know this person has a question. But what happens if the script is broke? What happens if you have 30 days worth of data lost? So you got all these people calling up or filling out that web page asking for information. They want to buy a Spectrum analyzer for $20,000. Never hear from you. They want to go to Cali. They never hear from you. Sometimes I think we have that on our web page where people fill out an informational page and then it never goes anywhere. And if you don't hear back, if you fill out an information page for a website, are you going to go to that college? Probably not. Probably you're not going to even buy a piece of equipment from that company. You're thinking, well, if they care so little, they're not even going to get back with me, and then I'm going somewhere else. So we had that problem at IFR, and so any of the emails that got forwarded on, and this was after they discovered that it had quit working for a period of time, and I forget how long that was, 2 or 3 weeks, but their minds are going rampant about how much business they've lost, and they could have lost quite a bit. I won't argue that. They said we want a backup of some sort, and so besides sending it on to them, we were actually writing that out to a file also, and that file would be a nightly process, would load that into a database. And then the salespeople could go out there and they could review that to match it up to make sure that's what they actually received. Because it was important to them not to lose any leads in terms of their sales. Now you might say, well, why didn't you just update the database directly from the website? Well, you could, but at that point, you have opened a hole between your website and your database. And so they could hack in. I wrote a program in the C# programming class using just basic SQL to update a database, to update it, to delete, and so forth, just normal SQL. And I made a change. I did an SQL injection attack on my own program to show how poorly it was written. And the SQL, see if I can remember, delete from like orders or something like that, where order number equals W0123 or something like that. So that was the SQL, and the W0123 came from a text box on the code, and I don't remember what I exactly did, but the text box, they put in W0123, and I changed it to put in a W0123 single quote, or I forget what I did exactly. It was a simple change. I had to play with it a little bit. I deleted every record in my database. Then we went into, well, how do we clean this up? How do we clean it up so they can't delete every record in your database? And this was an Access database, and I had never tried that before, and I was kind of shocked it actually worked. I would have expected Access to have it built in where you can't pass in an SQL injection attack. It made me wonder if anything programs it for it. Well, they even got a. That's pretty sad. Out here in W3 schools, they tell you how to do it. They teach you how to do it.
That was my best friend last semester.
No, when it's kind of like this, where you put like an or 1 equals 1 at the end or something like that. And but in my case, I do something different because it ended up putting a single quote at the end. Okay, now it's coming to me. So that it would end my beginning single quote. Then I have an or 1 equals 1, like that. Because this comes in as a string into your program. And so then the program tacks this part on the front of it. So it takes that, and you're passing this in. So then that gets concatenated on right here. And then the computer program usually puts a single quote at the end. And so you had delete from orders where order number is equal to this, and I made up of 1 here, so I didn't even have a valid work order. And then or 1 is equal to 1. Well, 1 is always equal to 1, isn't it? Which means it deleted everything from the table. I was actually very pleased that it worked, and how easy it was. That's what if you connect, a database to your web page, people can go out and do that. Now you have to actually go to a place where there's a delete capability. Like if you were going out there to delete your user account, for example, that'd be a perfect place, because it's going to issue a delete to delete your user ID from there, and so you just put that on at the end. And in theory, if they haven't programmed for it, it'll delete every user in their system. So they have 5,000 customers in there. It'll delete 5,000 customers. It's a simple check to make sure that they're not doing it. You just look for a single quote. No order number should have a single quote in it. No user ID should have a single quote in it. So it's like a 2-line if statement that you can put in as a computer programmer that'll safeguard your database from being cleaned out. And that's not a pleasant thing to come into the next. Not that I've ever been in that situation. They'd probably fire you, but not that I'd come in that situation. But you come in the next morning, it's like, well, we don't know what happened, but all 5,000 customers are gone from our database. What? Did I mention I'm quitting? Anyway, that's what that's doing. And here's the example I gave where you got the sum/input. That's where you bring the input in, and it comes in there just the same as if you were typing in the numbers at the command line. Now in Linux, a pipe symbol redirects, so it causes the output of one program to be redirected as input to another program. It's not like what I was showing in the batch file. You can redirect that into the more, you can redirect it into cat, you could, a lot of different options there. You can still do the greater than, but I ought to see if I can copy something and see if I can get my Linux working before we end tonight. Kelly. Okay, and this redirects it into this program sum, where this redirects it to the output. So this will write it out to a file. So this is sending the output of this into the input of this program, and this is just sending the output of this into a file. So that's the difference on those.
Can you specify what type of file you want to write it to?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, you can put any name there.
Okay.
And I don't know how to do it, but there's a way to, you can send your output to one file and you send your standard error to another file. And it's some kind of -E-O for the output, -E for the error. Because otherwise the error messages come to the screen, and if it's running in the middle of the night when there's nobody there, nobody sees it. So. Okay. And then the greater than appends it. So it doesn't overwrite the file that's out there, it just puts it at the end. So have to be careful about this. We had one, I don't think it was the same email program. We used to have lots of issues with email. It wasn't as consistent as it is now, it seems like. We'd usually lose a lot of emails. And so we had a process set up such that when they sent an email from internal to an outside, it went to a database, and then that database we would then cycle through and send the email out through the email system. So if our email system was down, we wouldn't lose all those emails. Like I say, the systems are much better now. You wouldn't ever do this. But anything that had an error, then we would write that to a file, and we'd append it. And the file was actually on the local machine. We didn't plan very far ahead. And I think after running for 2 or 3 years, the machine crashed. The file got too huge. So it kept concatenated on, and there must have been like maybe 50 emails out there that had errors, but they never got cleaned up because nobody was monitoring that file. And so they kept on writing over and over to this error file until eventually the machine crashed. So you have to do planning when you do things like that to make sure somebody's looking at that file. Let's see, pzip. It's probably the best program you could get is pzip. Pzip portable. You can install it on your flash drive. Then no matter where you're at, like this is a brand new computer to me because I screwed up my main computer earlier today. Okay, so there it is. Documents, Kali, extract. Now, variable length argument lists. It's possible to create functions to receive an unspecified number of arguments. Most functions in text have used the standard library function printf, which, as you know, takes a variable number of arguments. Because remember, you can have like the %d, you can have 100 of them, and then you have comma, and you'll have 100 variables to be plugged into those %ds. So there's no limit. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure you can't put 1 billion arguments in there. Never have tried, but as a minimum, printf must receive a string as its first argument, but printf can receive a number of additional arguments. I think within reason. The reason why I say within reason is because unless it does it dynamically, and I never have looked at source code for printf, unless it does it dynamically, it'll exceed the limits of that data structure. Function prototype for printf is this, int printf. What does this mean?
An integer?
Yeah. Which means it returns an integer, doesn't it? I doubt if I could break a printf. Although after deleting 25% of my registry earlier today, I probably could. Well, that's not good. I thought I had a file out here. Okay, so this printf here should actually is programmed to receive an integer. It's optional. If I had to guess, I'd guess 1 to indicate it's finished successfully, but maybe not. $43. What? Which number is greater than? That's what code I was looking at earlier. Build and run. Okay, I guess maybe I don't have my code blocks quite working correctly. It's a good thing the semester is about done. It's going to take me a while to fix my screw up, I think. No, I ran that one earlier. Maybe I just got to save it. No, it is the right one. So why is it doing 43? I thought it was had something from before. Strange. $44. $45. No clue. I'd have to go look to see what that meant, I guess. Okay. But anyway, again, it brings in that, and this implies over here that it can have a variable number of arguments. Although we're past it. bring that up. Copied it. This is the Premier hacking utility. I don't know how you say it. Kali Linux. If you're going into networking, this is a tool that you use to look to see where your weaknesses are in your network. So you run it against yourself. I'll let that do its thing. Okay. Now those three little dots, ellipsis, if I'm saying it right, ellipsi, must always be placed at the end of the parameter list. Macros and definitions of the variable length headers. The standard argument.h provide the capabilities necessary to build functions with variable length argument list. And this demonstrates function average. So here's a prototype up here, double average, and you see I got int, I, comma, and then three little dots. And here's a double average here. Double total is equal to 1, initialize the total. INTJ counter. Stores information needed by VA start and VA end. We'll talk about that here shortly, but so it's using I to control how many it goes through. So I tells you how many you're going to have. You're going to have 3 numbers, 5 numbers, or whatever. And then the VA arg, which we'll talk about here shortly, that's going to refer to our arguments that's passed in. So notice here, the average is W and Q, and I put 2 in because I got 2 variables, so W and Q. I put 3 in, I got W, X, Y, there's 3. Put 4 in, you got 4. So that first number controls the looping. Now these come in from that standard argument.h. You got your VA list, type suitable for holding information needed by the macros VA start, VA arg, and VA end. To access the arguments in a variable length argument list, an object of type VA list must be defined. So here we're assigning it the AP, or giving a name AP. Then VA start, a macro that invoked before the arguments of a variable length argument list can be accessed. Macro initializes the object declared with VA list for use by the VA arg and VA end. So it gets it ready. VA arg, a macro that expands to the value of the next argument in the variable length argument list. The value is a type specified as the macro's second argument. See how we put double here? Or you put INT for integer. Then VA end facilitates a normal return from a function whose variable length argument list was referred to by VA start macro. So you have to have your definition up here. You have your VA start, initializes it. You have to have your VA end that ends it. And then in here is where this will retrieve each individual element. And it retrieves it, but needs to know what type it is. So that's why it's double there. Does that make sense on that? See, I wasn't sure if I started doing some tools against my own website, and then all of a sudden I couldn't do those tools anymore. So I wasn't sure if they were smart enough to recognize I was doing them, and they blocked me or what. Not that I can actually remember the syntax. In map, command not found. What was it doing to that then? It's not there. Here's Nmap. What was that? Okay. There's a fast way to do Nmap. And I started off as a slow way. T5 or T1. What was it? Higher is faster. I bet it's T5.
It's like kind of hopper sniffer stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Dash T5, and then my IP address. Ping, math heals. I don't want to do Cali. I don't want to be fired. Okay, so 209, 17, 1116-9. This goes out and tells you the. Let me do it this time. It tells you what's opened up. Like they got the port opened up for FTP, for HTTP, and HTTPS. If you had a port opened up that was one you could hack into, see, that's your first thing, gathering information. Now, obviously, somebody doesn't want to sit here and do this against every website in the whole world, do they? So they automate this. They put this into a shell script, and then they could redirect that information into a file. And from within there, you could have another program do like a grep or some kind of search through it, and then find the ones that have Telnet open, and return just that IP address. So that's your goal. Well, if you're a hacker, they're sitting there trying to figure out, how can I write a shell script to do that? If I just do an ls like that. The greater than again writes it out to a file. So cat out.txt would now contain my file, or my folders. If you redirect it with the pipe symbol, you're redirecting it into like a more command. So it'll take that and put it into a more, and of course there's so little that that isn't not very meaningful. What would be meaningful? Anyway, you can do the greater than to concatenate it on the end of this file. If I see if I can get the syntax correct, / greater than out.txt. The -r is recursive, so recursively go through everything on your system, assuming I put that the root, the / in the correct place. I might have to have it before. Let me press enter. Notice that these error messages are popping up here. This is where I was talking about, is where you could redirect your error messages into a another file. Only one? Now if I do cat output.txt and pipe that into something else, like more, then allow me to go page by page through there. Anyway, just some examples of what they're talking about with some of that redirection. And the let's see, echo hi out 2.txt. So I got 3 of those there. If you did your change mods, 755, out.txt, out 2.txt, and out 32.txt. I usually get these wrong. I try to put 755 at the end, but I think it goes in the middle. Then ls-al, I just changed all of those to have that same permissions. So this just shows you, and I brought up the C code before, and it's set up such that you can do variable length parameters. So you can pass in multiple files. Or you can write your own average like this. Variable length probably are more useful if you're writing a system utility for like Linux or something like that. That just talks about the average. Okay, using command line arguments. On many systems, it's possible to pass arguments to main from a command line by including parameters, the int argc and character asterisk argv with the brackets in the parameter list of main. Parameter argc receives a number of command line arguments that the user has entered, and the v is the array of strings in which the actual command line arguments are stored. And common uses of command line arguments include passing options to a program, passing file names to a program. Passing file names. That's what I just showed you the change mod. Figure 14.3 copies a file in another file, 1 character at a time. Here's what we're talking about with the my copy. Then you have your input and then space output. Command line indicates file input to be copied to file output. cp out.txt, new out.txt. So these are parameters it takes in. Now I don't know if the CP is multi parameter or not, or if it's just these two. Never have looked at it. But again, you should be able to find it fairly easy. Google. Where in the world did that come from? Here's the code for copying a file. Actually, quite a bit, isn't it? But if you get bored on a Saturday night and want to go and read it, then can't sleep at night, go out and read it. One of the two. This is talking about the program. We're not looking at Visual C#, Visual C++. This is what it looks like to bring in multiple arguments. So if you were to compile this, this would allow you to bring in multiple arguments when you ran it. So For example, this program is called figure 14 underscore 03.c. So when you got done running it, you should be able to type figure 14 0.3, I don't know. Let's say that. And then you can pass in your parameters here. So whatever it's looking for. But that's how you'd run that after you compiled it. Notice when you run a C program in code blocks, it also creates an application. Maybe that'd be in command. Let me go into command. This PC. Hmm. Test.exe. See, it runs my program there. I could put that into a batch file. And so it runs that program. And so you can have it, have it redirected in input. So the power is still here with the batch. Just people just don't do it a lot anymore. And I'm not going to go through all that. Now, notes on compiling multiple source file programs. It's possible to build programs that consist of multiple source files. There are several considerations when creating programs in multiple files. For example, the definition of a function must be entirely contained in one file. It cannot span two or more files. In Chapter 5, we introduced the concept of storage class and scope. We learned variables declared outside any function definition are referred to as global variables. And global variables are accessible to any function defined in the same file after the variable is declared. Global variables are also accessible functions in other files. However, the global variables must be declared in each file in which they're used. For example, to refer to a global integer variable flag in another file, you can use the declaration extern int flag. This declaration uses a storage class specifier external to indicate that a variable flag is defined either later in the same file or in a different file. Compiler links forms a linker that unresolved references to variable flag appear in the file. If the linker finds a proper global definition, the linker resolves the references by indicating where flag is located. Go over that. Again, this refers to a preprocessor directive include standard io.h, which includes a file containing the function prototypes for functions such as printf and scanf. Printf and scanf functions are defined in other files. We do not need to know where they're defined. We're simply reusing the code in our programs. Linker resolves our references to these functions automatically as process enables us to use functions in a standard library. Okay, here's what I really want to get down to. Creating programs in multiple source files facilitates software reusability and good software engineering. Functions are made common to many applications. In such instances, those functions should be stored in their own source files, and each source file should have a corresponding header file containing function prototypes. This enables programmers of different applications to reuse the same code by including the proper header file and compiling their applications with the corresponding source file. Why do you think you need to do this? Especially in terms of Linux. Here's my bin directory. How do I do a wide? Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. I'm not even up. 27 to the e's. Multiply that times, let's say 5, that's 100 pages. Eating my data. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 22, 23, let's 23, let's say. You got 2,300 programs. All of them have their own source code, don't they? Here's some more. I don't even know where some of the default ones are, like CP. But if you were to want to compile this, create a binary, you have a ton of files that need to be compiled and built into your kernel. Having some kind of capability to do a lot of them at once is essential. By the way, I pretty well ignore those. I don't like to do that. It's hard. It never seems to work for me. I think NetBeans is the one I was looking at earlier today. There's one I was looking at earlier today. Let me see if it's NetBeans. Came here and it's talking about the different ways you can do it. Building from source. This is where you're taking all those different sources and you're creating a build out of it. I didn't want to do that. I figured that'd take me forever. I wanted to unzip a folder and be up and running, so I chose binaries. The idea of the sources is if you got some kind of weird machine configuration where the binaries just don't work, well, you can compile all the sources, and it's not like you have to do one at a time. You know, how long would that take you to compile 5,000 programs? You know, forever. You know, it's a lot more automated, but still, you have to kind of watch it and look for things that fail, and why did it fail? Because you have a wrong version of this or wrong version of that, and it's just a headache. Luckily, I downloaded this zip file, extracted it, and everything appeared to work fine. Well, I shouldn't say that, because I was getting some errors earlier, wasn't I? But anyway, in theory, it'll work fine, and I'll figure it out. On Linux, Unix systems, the utility is called make. Utility make reads a file called makefile. It contains instructions for compiling and linking the program. Products such as Eclipse and Microsoft Visual C++ provide similar utilities as well. Just because there's so many that they have to work with, you have to have that. Otherwise, nobody would ever install it because you'd have to compile all those source codes. General Utilities Library provides methods of terminating execution by means other than a conventional return. Function exit causes a program to terminate. The function often is used to terminate a program when input error is detected or when files to be processed by the program cannot be opened. Maybe. It depends on how you terminate it. When you have anything go wrong, your goal is to have a planned termination, not just where you fire off and exit because something doesn't work right. Koch Industries ran across this when I was there. I was on call at night, and the person in front of me, there's three of us on call. They call a first person, they can get a hold of him. They call the next person, they can get a hold of that person. They call a third person. Well, the person who was in front of me never answered his phone at night. So I received all his calls. So I was on call for 2 months, and they called me every other night. And 3 a.m., 2 a.m., they called me and say, yeah, we screwed this up. We ran it in the wrong order again. It's like, I don't know what that's going to do. And it's like, oh, God, okay, I'll be in. I'll just drive in and figure out. And all the time you're sitting there, what is with these idiots? Why can't they run it in the proper order, 1 this, 2 this, 3 this, and they get it out of order. Well, I'd go in and fix it, get it up and running. I wouldn't fix it. I'd just get it up and running because it's 2 a.m. in the morning. I don't want to be there. I want to be home sleeping. I got to be back at 8 a.m. the next day. So maybe I go home and get a couple more hours sleep. Then the whole pattern would repeat. Well, the management at Koch said finally, why are we doing this? Why don't we fix it so it doesn't break again? It's just like a novel concept. No programmer ever thought of it. It took somebody in management to say, hey, this doesn't make much sense. And I'm glad they did. And they started focusing on not just fixing it for the night. How do we fix it so it doesn't happen again? If we got somebody so bad in operations that they can't follow simple steps, should we fire them? Do we put dependencies in there? So like when this shell script runs, it writes out a flag file. And this one, if that flag file is not there, it's not going to run. So it waits until that flag file is present. There's scheduling programs like cron and so forth. But again, that cron is dependent upon sometimes whether the time frame. And if you got a process that's really running a lot longer than it should, then cron may go ahead and fire this job off. So things you have to plan. How do you get it so it runs in the proper order? So when they say a function is often used to terminate a program when input error is detected, no, you handle the input error appropriately, and then you can do an exit. So you might write it to an error file so the people next day can be notified about it. Might text a person, something. Function add exit registers a function that should be called upon successful termination of the program. Okay. That talks a little bit more about it. I'm not going to go into that too much. I don't really like that. Putting exit in the middle of your program means you don't know how to write it properly to end it gracefully. Gracefully, even when it's not working. Like the input file's missing, your program should be designed to end it gracefully. That's why I don't like that. Okay. It's what I complained about earlier in the course about using a break. Remember how a break from I don't like those either. That means you don't know how to program it properly and so forth. C provides integer and floating point suffixes for explicitly defined types of integers and floating point constants. U or uppercase U for unsigned integer, L or uppercase L for long integer. double L in some form for a lawn integer. That means when you got a number, you have to put that on at the end to indicate what type it is. Other programming languages do this. In C Sharp, when we're working with floating point values, if we had a float num, you could not say the num is equal to 3. We'd have to put an F on there to indicate its floating point. So that's not unheard of in C-based languages that you indicate that in some manner. And that's what they're talking about. F for float, L for lawn, double. Okay, and that shows an example there. Reason why that is, if you don't have the F there, the 3, you might say, well, it's an integer. It could be, but I'm guessing that the program will interpret it as a double. And so you're trying to write a double to a float. And so strongly typed languages don't let you do that, and you have to put an F there. I don't remember. I may be mixing this up with C Sharp. Let's see. Float F equals, or F equals to 3. And I have no clue what the format specifier is for that. F maybe? Let's try D. Not D. F. Surprised they even let me do F. What kind of bad programming is that? It'd confuse somebody if they see F equals 3F. It's like, what? No, it doesn't like that. On integer constant. Let's try that. 3.2. So, question becomes, if I take that off, how interesting. You can't put an F on just an integer. But that's what we're talking about with those suffixes. Signal handling. External asynchronous event or signal can cause the program to terminate prematurely. Some events include interrupts, typing Control-C on Linux, Unix, or Windows system, illegal instructions, segmentation violations, termination orders from the operating system, and floating point exceptions, division by 0 or multiplying large floating point values. And we got a library, signal.h. That allows you to program to handle those events, so it doesn't crash ungracefully. That's weird. I don't know how many times we saw that in the fall semester, Sigabert. One person in particular, he seemed to get Sigaberts on every program. I never knew what a Sigabert was. I never researched it. But abnormal termination of the program, such as call to function abort. We finally figured out how to fix his Sigaberts, and that was in the Swift programming language, using in Xcode. Interesting. Okay. It'd mean more if you'd seen him get that 100 times and it being a joke that he couldn't write a program without getting Sigabert. And he'd be following the same instructions I'd be doing on the board there. He'd be typing the code in exactly right. Mine would work just fine. Everybody else would work just fine. He'd get Sigabert. And he had different machines, different days too. So it was like a user. I don't know what he was doing. The what?
Interesting.
Yeah, I was sure he was screwing with me. It's like he was deliberately trying to break it each time. It's just like, Mr. Hayes, I got a Sigabert again. I got a Sigabert again. I got a Sigabert again. Plus, the main thing is I couldn't figure out how to fix it at first because it wasn't an easy error to fix in the Swift programming language. You had to delete all the dependencies and then kind of re-add them in. And it wasn't actually like a line of code you could look at. Okay, SIG, FPE, erroneous arithmetic operation, SIG ILL, SIG ILL, detection of illegal instructions, SIG int, receipt of an interactive attention signal, SIG segment V, access memory is not allocated, SIG term, termination request sent to the program. This Sigabert was probably what they were probably written in. Large body of existing Objective-C code written for work with. Could be as written. One portion of it is written in some kind of C-based language, and that's why the Sigabert was coming up, and they weren't doing anything special with it. They were just passing it straight on to you, and you can see that message. In other words, they weren't handling it correctly. They weren't popping up saying, "Hey, these are the causes of a Sigabert," because this is a Windows package, so it could have come up with a nice paragraph explanation of what that issue was about. As it is, they just trap the standard error message and just pass it on. And you think Google would handle it, but it took a long time to find a solution in Google. It talks about those. You can read those. And this is just looking for x equal 25 in order to raise that issue. For whatever reason, they don't like 25. Signal handler. Here they're passing on a signal value received. Looks like a string. So again, not sure if they got any lines of code here. Interrupt signal 2 received. Do you wish to continue? Is that proper coding? No. I suppose if you provided them with a owner's manual and they could look up interrupt signal 2 to see what in the world that meant, then it would be proper coding. But unless you're short of memory in whatever electronic device you're programming, you never do things like that. I have. Don't get me wrong, but it's poor programming. You got dynamic memory allocation, functions callec, allocate and reallocate. Arrays are better than linked lists for rapid sorting. However, arrays are normally static data structures. And then you got the standard library.h that has two functions, callocate and reallocate. They use to modify dynamic arrays. So that if you had a 1 million array entries coming in, you You wouldn't have to have that entire memory allocated to begin with. You could dynamically allocate it. I gave you this example before, Excel. Memory-wise, it's allocated so much memory, hasn't it? As I start going down, at some point, it's going to allocate more memory. If I keep going down, it'll keep allocating more and more memory. And so forth. So this is an example of dynamic memory allocation. If it went and allocated all the memory to begin with in RAM that this could use, then whenever you load Excel, you could do nothing else. As I delete these, in theory, if I come up here and press my delete, that should be given back to the system now. So Excel should come back and say, okay, I don't need as much now, I'm going to shrink that back down. So I'll give you that memory back. To bring Excel up, I'm using memory on my computer. When I close this, if the program's written correctly, it should give the memory back. So that's a proper use of memory. A lot of it's dynamic. Excel didn't used to be that way. You've heard me say that, I think. I get old, I repeat. Again, that was about 20 years ago. That version of Excel was out. If you went in and out all day long, it would eventually eat up all the memory on the operating system and it'd have to reboot. They'd call up and say, my computer's got slower and slower as the days gone on. It's like, just reset your computer and that'll fix it. Because we knew what it'd do. When you reset your computer, it gives them back this big memory space again that it can then start giving little pieces whenever you run a program. I get this a lot at the bank, and I don't know the reasoning behind it. I know a couple possibilities. Like last Saturday when I went in, the computer was going slow. And he says, yeah, the computer's just kind of waking up and it's going slow. It's like, doesn't make any sense. One possibility is that they just booted it up and it is loading a lot of background applications, processes. Another thing is that they never fully rebooted it. And so all week long, it's been running something. They're Xing out, going back in, but don't reboot the computer. And so it's not giving that memory back if it's written poorly. And so that's why it's going slow by Saturday morning. Maybe they're instructed when they leave Saturday to shut the computer off. And so when they shut it off, and Monday morning when somebody boots it up, it's got all the big memory space again you can work with. Or it could be that there's just nighttime processes that are still running by 9 o'clock in the morning when I went in. But it's interesting to hear him say that. Yeah, the computer must be tired.
Yeah, all night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was a Friday night for the night before. And, I think they're good at banking. They're not very good at computers. You go into my bank and not that my eyes are good enough to see it, or if anybody can see it at that angle, but there isn't a black strip covering the monitor that's down in the desk. And so if you lean over a little bit, you can see traces of the writing. I would have a real hard time if you gave me something to read upside down in the first place. And then it's smaller and it's through a glass, but maybe you could. I don't know. Most places do not allow you to see like that. They got it blocked off, with kind of some kind of device or something like that. And I don't know very much about physics and so forth, but they even have at some of the security. If you have your monitor here, they got special devices because the monitor is giving off radiation, and it's based differently upon what you have on the screen. So the text will come across differently. So it bounces off the window, and somebody with a reader can read what's on your screen. So they can read your what password you're inputting, for example. And I don't know if there's something you could do that with, like if you had glasses, smart glasses or something, where you had that, again, those visions popping off, where you get that. How that does real interesting. They have special covers for they had to block that whatever comes off of monitor. And I'm not great at hardware, so that's just some of that training that NSA paid for us to go to. They talked about that. People in high security positions got to worry about having a window and so forth. Even if you're 10 stories up, they still got a device they can point at the window to gather. Let's see. CAlloc clears memory, it allocates. malloc does not. Function reallocate changes the size of an object allocated by a previous call to those. So giving it more memory, basically. So if it keeps growing. I just kind of want to generally cover what those are used for. Avoid zero size allocations and calls to malloc, calloc, and realloc. Unconditional branching with GoTo. Throughout text, we stress the importance of using structured programming language to build reliable software that's easy to debug, maintain, and modify. In some cases, performance is more important than strict adherence to structured programming techniques. In some cases, some unstructured programming techniques may be used. For example, you can use break to terminate execution of repetition structure before the loop continuation condition becomes false. This saves unnecessary repetitions of the loop if the task is completed before the loop termination. I don't remember if I remember how to do a GoTo. I use it so seldom. Let's see if I got it right. What this does is comes down here, hits this printf, does this, hits this GoTo, which goes down to here. And then I print this, hits this GoTo, which then goes back up to here, which then repeats that whole cycle over again. So this is an infinite loop I wrote. They tell you in programming never to use GoTo. Well, if that was true, then they wouldn't even include that in the programming language, would they? When I went to work for Coke, they told us all 4 years of programming classes I took, they said never use a GoTo. It's bad programming, blah, blah, blah. What do you think they told me to do at Coke? Use a GoTo. They were programming in a package called COBOL, where you'd say perform this function varying x from, I don't remember the exact syntax, from x to from 1 to 10. And then there'd be this function down here. I like this. And we'd have like sum is equal to x plus sum or something like that. Lots of lines of code here. So what this would do is the for loop was built in the call. So this came down here and it was calling this, and you'd have to remember it was going from 1 to 10. If you did not see this up above and you went down to this line of code, you would not realize that you're supposed to go from 1 to 10. So it's kind of like having a part of your for loop separate from the rest of it. And they did not want us to go back and forth trying to figure that out. I'm not sure if there are any programming languages that still do this, but instead what they told us to do is like you initialize x to 1, you have your start here, you do whatever lines of code, you increase x by 1, and then you say if x is less than or equal to 10, go to start. And this was the preferred way of doing that because it was all contained right here. You didn't have to bounce back and forth up here. This might have been of line 50 and this is on line of 2000. So you're having to go back and forth between those lines of code and so forth. So what they're talking about is some of the things you learn in programming where they say this is the way it's got to be done. You get out in real life and they say, no, that's not quite the way we do it here. Now, having said that, I don't think I used to go to one time at IFR. It's just like I didn't need to. It typically is considered bad coding. Unconditional branch. Okay, got our label. Label as a colon. We already talked about that. Pretty much about every programming language still has the go-to. And I already showed you an example of that. Not sure what they're doing there. Chapter 3 was stated that only 3 control structures are required to write any program: sequence, selection, repetition. When the rules of structured programming are followed, it is possible to create deeply nested control structures from which it is difficult to escape efficiently. Some programmers use go-to statements in such situations as a quick exit from a deeply nested structure. I may sit up here in my ivory tower and say you should never use go-to, it's the worst thing in the world. But if it's going to take you 2 days to rewrite the program such that it's done correctly with proper nesting and beautifully designed for loops, while loops, functions, does a company want you to spend 2 days doing that, or do they want you to spend 10 minutes putting a go-to in there?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah. You know, is this going to run, just as good as before? You know, efficiency-wise, the speed, will it work? Yes. Then do it. You know, put that. We can handle one go-to in there. It's kind of when it goes overboard where it becomes an issue. There's one line, one program. You've heard me say this, so I use the same stories over and over. But there's one code I looked at that had so many go-tos, and he had named all of his variables as single letters. I never could figure out what in the world that program was doing. I finally just gave it back to my manager and said, I can't look at this. There's no way I can debug this. So I'm not sure if he found somebody else or had it rewritten or what. But okay, this can eliminate the need to test multiple conditions, escape from a control structure. There are some additional situations where go-to is actually recommended. That leaves me kind of queasy. Consider using a go-to chain when leaving a function on error when using and releasing resources. Go-to statement can be used to exit deeply nested control structures efficiently. And the go-to statement is unstructured and can lead to programs that are more difficult to debug, maintain, and modify. Again, you can, I suppose, use them, but they should be last resort, a time savings, 2 days versus 10 minutes type of deal. Sometimes you write a code and it builds and you keep evolving it and writing it, And it started out as this beautiful work of art that you're so proud of, and then by the time you just keep changing it, you realize it's just so structured so badly, and you want to redo it. And I've asked my manager on that sometimes. I said, I don't feel good about the structure of this, and he'd say, well, is it working? And I'd say, yeah, so just put it out there, don't worry about it. But that happens, where you start out with the perfect design, but then you start changing it, and it loses everything. So sometimes you end up with doing stuff you don't want to do. Any questions on any of that? Well, next week is the last week. So I got the first here. I won't be covering any material on the first. I will come on to see if you have any questions. I won't ask any questions directly on how to do something on the final exam, but if you don't understand something that's asking, I'll be here. So sign on and get that. Final exam is due, or final project, I should say, is due on the 3rd at 5 o'clock. That'll give me the weekend to start grading them, and then into the first part of this week here. If there's anything you haven't turned in project-wise, you can still turn that in. If you need me to email you the problem by the book, I can. I'll probably have you email me the code. For some reason, Blackboard isn't allowing me to change the due date. Poor programming, I think. Let's see if it's just the other night, or if it's still doing it. Let's see. Where's Blackboard? Don't I have Blackboard? A lot of people going away from Blackboard because it has some programming issues. How good a program is not necessarily the design, but it's your programmers behind the scenes. And I think it was C# I was going into. No, where's a C? They probably do the same thing here. I think I was going to week 3. And change due date. Tells me I don't have the appropriate privileges to perform this action. So I will not be able to move the due dates back for you because some programmer doesn't know how to program it correctly. I'm not doing anything bizarre. I'm just choosing the change due date option. But if you do need me to email you the problem numbers, then I can do that if there's some that you haven't turned in. Yeah. Interesting. But again, that's bad programming you see there. Not sure what they've done wrong on that, but I'm thinking about turning it in. But last time I turned something in, it was just such a nightmare. They told me that was the functionality of the program. It's just like if I gave you a 0 on a project earlier in the course, and then you turned it in, I let you turn it in, and I went in here into the needs grading option, and I graded it. What it should do is the grade I put in there should be the one that's recorded. Well, it would revert back to the 0. And I didn't notice this at first. I had some students email me and say, hey, I thought you said I was going to get credit for this. And it's like, hey, you did. I graded it. You're fine. And then, no, I'm not fine. And I went and looked, and sure enough, it was reverting back to the previous value. And I went out in the Blackboard's error list, and they have quite an error list, and I found the error and saw it was an issue and turned it into our people here, and they said, no, that's a functionality. It's like, yeah, that's the way it's written, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. So since then, I haven't turned anything in. I just deal with the errors. Well, we'll go ahead and call it quits there. And if you have any questions, stick around. But otherwise, we're done. And I'll end the recording.